This is the 5:30 News on Kpax, Montana's news leader.
Good evening, I'm Jill Valley.
And I'm Dennis Bragg.
A shocking development tonight in a decades-old murder case in Montana. Two men serving life sentences for the 1994 murder of a Helena area woman could soon be set free after new DNA evidence points to somebody else as the killer.
And this new suspect is already in prison serving 2 life sentences for a double homicide at Deer Lodge, and is the man who terrorized a Hamilton woman back in 1998.
This is a story we've been working on for more than a year, and we start our coverage with the new evidence that could set Paul Jenkins and Fred Lawrence free after more than 20 years in prison. A jury convicted the two for the murder of Donna Marr, who was kidnapped and beaten to death outside a bar west of Helena. But in the past few years, the Montana Innocence Project reviewed the evidence, and what it uncovered has shaken this case to its core. The new DNA test on crime scene evidence shows it belongs to a David Wade Nelson, a man already in prison for killing a Deer Lodge area mother and son 2 years ago, and who had served time for a violent attack on a Hamilton woman in the late 1990s. It not only means 2 men in prison for 2 decades could go free, it also means that a family torn apart will finally be reunited with their father.
Count 1, deliberate homicide, accountability, guilty. Count 2, aggravated kidnapping, guilty.
This is video Crystal Combs has only seen once. She was 15 years old when a jury convicted her dad, Paul Jenkins, of murder.
I remember the doors shutting, everything being cold, and the first words out of their mouth was, "I'd never see my daddy alive again."
She and her siblings never believed their father was a killer, but living with a father behind bars was confusing.
And I went through times in my life in the last 23 years where I've tried to force myself to accept the reality of what my life was, but I never got to the point where I actually believed he was guilty.
Donna Marr was closing up at the Jackson Creek Saloon in Montana City back in January of 1994. She was robbed, kidnapped, and beaten to death with a crowbar. Her body found later that day. Prosecutors convinced the 2 juries the men were guilty. Both received 2 life sentences each. Paul Jenkins appealed his conviction several times but lost. Then in 2003, the Montana legislature allowed the convicted to petition for DNA testing. And that's when the Montana Innocence Project got involved in the case and got permission to conduct new forensic tests. Crystal got the news this fall. The DNA on some crime scene evidence did not match Fred Lawrence's or her father's, and that another possible suspect had emerged. It is possible those 2 men could go free after almost 24 years in prison.
He's very excited. He's beside himself. He's not sure how to feel either. I think we're all confused and a little bit overwhelmed at this point. My emotions go from happy to sad to angry to confused, and that can all happen within 60 seconds. I can be smiling, and then before the end of my sentence, I'll be crying because I don't understand. I just don't understand how all the opportunities was there to get the right person, and my entire life was changed.
Paul Jenkins has been in the prison infirmary in Lewistown. He lost both legs to diabetes, but his lawyer tells me he does plan to use his prosthetics to walk out. But of course, it will depend on what the judge decides to do with that motion to release. Paul Jenkins' lawyer, Thad Atkins, is working the case with the Montana Innocence Project. In his statement to us, he tells us Paul Jenkins and Fred Lawrence have spent more than 23 years in state custody for crimes they did not commit. We hope that the Attorney General's office will determine that the interest of justice outweigh defending these wrongful convictions and stipulate to Paul and Fred's release from prison. He also says the Montana Innocence Project deserves enormous credit for uncovering new evidence and bringing this story to light. Good evening, I'm Jill Valley.
And I'm Dennis Bragg. He's just 24 hours away from his jail cell, and today Paul Jenkins is beginning his new life on the outside.
A judge vacated his murder conviction after DNA identified another person as the killer. In our exclusive interview, he tells us after 2 decades in prison, today he's enjoying family, freedom, and fried chicken.
I never thought at one time I'd ever see this day.
64-year-old Paul Jenkins is spending his first 24 hours in 23 years a free man. He has more catching up to do than he knows.
I got grandkids I've never laid eyes on, so I'd like to see them.
It took 7 years from the time the Montana Innocence Project took the case to bring Paul to this day. In our emotional interview, he tells me he knew his family was there, outside the prison walls, waiting for him.
None of my family turned their back on me. All of them stayed with me all the way. I think that's what made me want to keep fighting. But everybody stuck with me all the way, and I was happy.
He has grandchildren to teach him about iPhones and Netflix, a lifetime to reconnect with his son and his daughter Crystal, who lost him when she was just 14 years old. That will take some time to process.
Yeah, it's just going to be hard. It's going to be a day-by-day thing now. So I just got the rest of my life to relive it and go on and make myself happy, I hope.
The DNA testing that freed him will no doubt be a player in other upcoming cases. And where prison time takes its toll, Paul knows this was worth the fight.
I don't give up. Yeah, don't give up, no matter what you do. Just don't give up, keep going.
Now, Paul walked out of the prison medical facility in Lewistown last night on his leg prosthetics. He says it was important to him to walk out of there on his own steam. He's also been looking forward to eating KFC, which he is doing right about now. There's a news conference tomorrow at the UM Law School with the Montana Innocence Project to talk about this case. It starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. We have more on the history of this case and the fundraiser to help Paul on our Kpax News app. Just go to the Scene on Kpax section. It took 7 years, countless court hearings, and DNA testing to free two men serving life sentences in the Montana State Prison for murder. Today, Paul Jenkins and Freddie Lawrence stood with the Montana Innocence Project to thank those who never gave up on them. It was a day of gratitude to celebrate the Montana Innocence Project, the justice system, and the lawyers who freed two men once serving life sentences for murder.
This is absolutely, as a lawyer, the culmination of a long career. It's the best thing I've ever done professionally.
Paul Jenkins and Freddie Lawrence left prison this week after serving almost 24 years behind bars. In 1994, a jury convicted them for the murder and kidnapping of Donna Marr in Montana City. They were sent to prison for the rest of their lives. But just a few years ago, Montana's enhanced post-conviction DNA testing law allowed more testing in cases like this. And when they got DNA test results on a piece of rope from the crime scene, it changed everything.
There was a mixture of DNA that contained Donna Marr's DNA and a male individual. The male individual whose DNA was found in the scene is not the two fellows that are sitting here to my left. They were excluded to some astronomical statistic like 1 in 10B.
This case has worked out precisely the way that we believe the legislature intended that statute to work, and we're very pleased with the outcome. We still have, they have not been exonerated yet, but we're hopeful to come to that point very soon.
Today, Paul and Fred met all those who worked hard on their behalf the past 7 years, those who believed in their innocence. They're adjusting to the freedom neither thought they'd ever see.
It's hard to explain joy. I was scared to come out because I've been in there for 24 years. I was happy to get out, don't get me wrong, but it was a big adjustment.
They've entered a brand new world of cell phones and the internet. Fred hopes to go to college. But where Paul Jenkins returned to his family, Fred is the one most damaged by the passage of time.
My wife died since I was in prison. My mom died since I was in prison. Both of my daughters were adopted out. I lost my parental rights while I was in prison. I have no idea where my daughters are, and if anybody could help me find them, I'd appreciate that.
Both Fred and Paul tell us they're not angry at the time they've lost. Both men are ready to live out the rest of their lives the best way they can. This is a story the Montana Innocence Project is hoping to repeat. It's already researching new cases in hopes of freeing others wrongfully convicted. Now, how the rest of this case plays out could be determined in the next 6 weeks. That DNA found at the crime scene matches that of David Wayne Nelson. He is already in prison for murder.